Hello, everybody, and welcome here to today's B2B Hour on Auto Conversion. This is a monthly webcast series we facilitate here on Auto Conversion. It's for B2B marketing and sales professionals, business owners, entrepreneurs, you name it. If you fit that, you should be here. Today is Wednesday, September the 8th. I'm Ryan Girardi. Hey, thank you for joining us. So, our general theme for this program for our show is how to stay connected and engaged with customers, strategic partners, and employees, all important factors within your business. We offer a unique product here on Auto Conversion for you to do this, and we invite you here to learn, to network, and to grow your personal, your professional brand, grow your network, and grow your online reputation. I'll speak more to that a little bit later. But today on the program, our specific focus will be on employee productivity, space utilization, and overall organizational efficiency. So, efficiency and productivity, these are two things that go hand in hand for both individual workers and teams or organizations. But did you know that most work groups perform at just 50 to 70% of their potential? Why is that? And how is this measured? How's it calculated? And more importantly, what can be done to increase that number? Now, many organizations look to increase output. Sorry about that. I have the wrong screen here. They look to increase output by hiring more workers. This can just add to overall underperformance. So, improving the productivity within yourself and your employees and your teams and your work groups is likely your biggest opportunity. The best businesses in most categories enjoy productivity levels at 80 to 90% or even higher. But to get there, they've had to learn, experiment, innovate, and invest. So, this is the premise of today's episode of the B2B Hour. And we'll begin the show with a conversation with Rob Marshallonis on employee productivity. And we'll look into how that's measured and how leaders can improve productivity. And then we'll shift our focus to personal efficiency, how to awaken the mind, body, space, the spirit connection to clear clutter from your physical space and hopefully your inner space too. We'll have Gayle coming on for that part. And then after those two conversations, in the last part of our show today, we'll bring everybody on stage and we'll have a panel discussion on the subject as well. So all this and more coming up. So stay tuned. All right, here we are, and we are ready to get started. Rob Marshallonis, welcome to the B2B Hour on Auto Conversion.
Good to be with you here, Ryan. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. A little bit of prep work goes into this, and preparation goes a long way. But folks, like I said, our focus here with Rob is on employee productivity. And I wanted to get started right away, Rob, because some of the talking points that even I just mentioned came from your material, from your website, from your videos. One of the things that you put out there is that most companies operate at 50 to maybe up to 70% of productivity. So can you expand on that? What, specifically, what does productivity mean? How's that defined? And how, I would like to get into how that's measured. What are the metrics that we use to measure that?
Right. When I work with clients, Ryan, I love to ask them first which of their work groups or which of their employees do they wish were more productive. And related to that, it's to quantify that question, I ask them to rate their employees or their work groups on a scale from 0 to 100. And it's always interesting to see the answers I get. Typically, I get a number on a scale from 0 to 100, a number between 50 and 70 in terms of to describe the productivity level of their employees or employee that they have in mind. So if you split the difference between 50 and 70, say 60% productive, that's what I often find. And the data and statistics will back that up, that many work groups are operating in and around the 60% productivity.
Okay, so does that make it a subjective, I guess, observation because it's peer to peer, right? And it's not data driven per se. It's more like a subjective response.
Yes, that's an interesting way to look at it. It is oftentimes it is subjective, but one of the goals in the work and going down this path is to back up whatever your conclusion or whatever the productivity measure is with data. So it each person in each work group is a little bit different, and therein lies the work that I do. But the reality is some employees in some work groups are a lot easier to measure than others when it comes to their productivity, right? And so if you have a sales team, a sales work group, it's maybe a little bit easier because you have some sales goals of contacts or proposals or closes or revenue that's generated or profits that's generated. So that becomes easy. But how do you measure the productivity of, say, a group of truck drivers?
That's what I'm curious about. Like, what kind of questions would you ask specific to about productivity? Do you want to use that example, maybe, like you said, of truck drivers?
Well, the first setup question is how would you define your work groups? So when you think of productivity and incentives, which I'm a big believer in, if you think about those in terms of work groups, it makes it a lot easier. So first define the work groups. And for most small to medium-sized businesses, oftentimes you can conveniently put all your employees into 3 or 4 or 5 work groups. And so that's kind of a starting point. And then, yeah, how would, what do you want most from that work group? So the conversations go from there, whether it's sales folks or senior leaders in an organization or, truck drivers, factory workers, field technicians. That's the big question is, what do you want from them and how are you currently, and how would you like to measure their productivity?
Okay. So work groups in a way would be kind of the roles within the company, what lanes you're in within the company would come up with the work group. Who's helping you come up with these questions? Do you have like a pool of questions, or are the leaders in the company saying, "Hey, we want to know about these things," or is it a mix?
There's always a dialogue, but certainly I have a list of questions and a methodology to it. I find it's important to have a methodology for looking at employee productivity and driving productivity improvements, but I try not to be so rigid that I'm not taking into account the uniqueness of every business or every organization and every work group and even every individual. So it takes a little bit of discipline to balance the two between my methodical questions and just a deep understanding of what's going on in the organization and what the owners or the leaders want.
So an organization that wants to bring you in for this purpose, right? To really look under the hood of productivity. They find you, they talk to you. Can you explain the process? What does that process look and feel like? Just to even, are we talking, weekly meetings and after a few weeks you have some questions? Can you get into the details of that process maybe?
Sure. Most people reach out to me just through word of mouth, and one person has had an experience and recommends me to another. And so I will typically offer a proposal. There'll be a discussion and some discovery and understanding, and then I will follow through with a proposal. Typically, the proposal has an assessment portion and coming up with incentive plans for individual work groups or some options that I'll provide to a business owner or employer. So that's the process. Usually from beginning to end in the work that I do is from 4 to 8 weeks per work group. And oftentimes it's done on a project basis. Sometimes we have a discussion and nothing comes of it. Other times we have a discussion and the leader or the organization finds value in moving forward and we engage. And then oftentimes I end up, staying in touch with those organizations in some sort of a support or an ongoing help role for them.
So you talk about meeting with these work groups over a period of several weeks. I'm going I'm going to assume they were traditionally in-person meetings, but maybe not. Maybe they were audio conferences, were they video conferences? Clearly now with the pandemic, I'm sure there's been a push towards video, but pre-pandemic, how were those meeting points facilitated?
Certainly where I like to meet with the business and the business owners and the work group in person, and I make every effort to do that. Yes, with COVID and pandemic, we've transitioned to more Zoom and online discussions. But ideally, I meet with these work groups and the businesses in person, and it's just an opportunity. It's my effort to get to know the people and the circumstances and the situations initially, and then the opportunities and the dynamics within the organization that we can explore and challenge and come up with some options to improve productivity.
Great. Now I'm going to bring up your website, LSP123. If you could maybe just take a moment to explain what LSP is to folks that are listening or watching.
Sure. LSP is an acronym for some principles that I've been using for 20 plus years throughout my career. Most of my career has been in operations, in running factories, and in one way or another, encouraging, helping, motivating work groups to be more productive. So LSP is an acronym for leadership, strategy, and process. Leadership, strategy, and process. And we're all familiar with those terms, but my way of looking at LSP is that the greatest impact you can have in your business and as a leader is with your leadership and the leaders that you develop or recruit and retain in the business. That's where the most of the impact are in the leaders. What we need from each leader, though, is to be able to come up with a plan or a strategy to move their work group forward, right? So from the leaders to move their work group forward with a strategy. And then out of that comes oftentimes many processes that are required to implement the strategy. So LSP works together in most organizations, and it's just an interesting, simplified way for leaders to look at their organization, do some initial assessment, and to think about which buttons to push to drive employee productivity forward.
Do you distinguish a difference between strategy and plans?
Usually not, Ryan. Usually not. I mean, a strategy, there's all kinds of terms for it: game plan, strategy. It's looking at your environment and looking at your resources and looking at your clients or your deliverables and coming up with a plan, right? I mean, sometimes it gets overcomplicated in the process, but I think a simple way of looking at strategy is a plan. What's your plan to win?
Mm-hmm. I want to bring this up during the discussion about planning because I find a lot of folks in the executive seat tend to be, especially at the CEO level, the CMO level, tend to be more big thinkers, almost abstract. And when you get into planning and strategy, they don't seem to have the awareness all the time. So I'd love to bring that up in our discussion. But with the few minutes we have remaining before we switch out and bring Gayle on, which, folks, by the way, I'm talking here with Rob Marshallonis from LSP123.com about employee productivity. In about 5 minutes, we're going to bring Gayle Gunn on and switch to space utilization. But then Rob will come back on for our panel discussion with everybody else around organizational efficiency. But what I'd like to do is maybe shift into incentives, because you have a book called Incent Share. I'm going to go ahead and bring the website up while you're talking, and then let's tie that into employee productivity. But why don't you go ahead and open the box here for us about your book, Incent Share?
Sure. There are many ways to drive employee productivity, and I've explored a number of them and actually use, and I'm a fan of many different ways to drive employee productivity. But my personal experience, my experience in working with clients, Ryan, is there's no better way to drive high levels of employee productivity than to put, it's one way or another, put some skin in the game for these employees. The employees that are going to help you be successful, are going to innovate, are going to work well together, and so I encourage employers and business owners to look for the low cost, no cost ways first to drive employee productivity. But at a mid to higher level of productivity improvement, I found that just putting some skin in the game, oftentimes with incentive plans where there's some sort of reward, oftentimes it's a financial reward, but it doesn't need to be, you can drive the highest levels of employee productivity. And just one important link to that is, if you think about the most successful businesses that we would know and are visible in the, on television and in our stores and in our homes and in our pockets, the most successful businesses in the world, almost all of those, certainly the publicly traded companies, they all have very deliberate, very aggressive incentive plans of one form or another. And so this isn't a foreign concept to the big boys and some of the most successful businesses that we would all be familiar with. It's not a foreign concept. Matter of fact, it's fundamental to their strategy to drive employee productivity and success.
So when you talk about, say, financial incentives, would that include things like stock options, profit sharing? Is that what you're referring to?
It could, especially if you're a publicly traded company, but it doesn't need to be. It could just be simple financial bonuses or some sort of a financial payout. But there are other ways to reward employees for their productivity and for helping to make your business more successful. So, and it can go from having one employee up to having 1,001 employees. I believe it still applies, and I believe every role in a business can be incentivized in one way or another.
Right. I'd love to hear maybe one popular example beyond just a financial bonus or whatever. What would be a popular or common incentive for employers and employees?
Well, yeah, I think one simple one we can probably all relate to is time. And how many of us would believe that our time is more valuable than our money? And so there are ways to incentivize employees where the reward they get is time off, special time, special experiences, time to do things that we coordinate, or time to do things on their own.
Good. I love it. I think we all need more time off because we definitely live in a work culture, and there's more to life than just hustle and grind. So Rob Marshallonis, everybody, from LSP 123, we're talking about employee productivity. We're going to switch over to Gayle Gunn, talk about space utilization, and then Rob's going to join us back for the discussion on organizational efficiency. But Rob, thank you for taking the time to be here.
My pleasure.
All right. So now what we're going to do is make a switcheroo. Watch this. You ready? Well, actually, I'm going to do something official. So real quick, folks, I'm going to have Gayle Gunn on in just a moment. We're going to be talking about space utilization, how to clutter up your physical and even your inner space. We'll be talking about for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to open back up to our B2B Marketing Pros discussion. Rob will rejoin the stage with me and Gayle. And then we also have Ron Sandell, who's part of that discussion group, which I'll explain how he ended up here. So stay tuned, but let's go ahead and bring Gayle up here. I got to bring this off. All right. There we go. Hello, Gayle. Welcome to the program.
Hello. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. Gayle and I have a little bit of history. I will share. We've met through Clubhouse. We have a mutual colleague, Lance Knob, who you have seen on the show, folks that are watching here. Lance has been up on the B2B Hour a couple of times. And in fact, I have a special announcement for later today, but Lance runs a Clubhouse room every Thursday called the Hot Seat. And Gayle is one of the recurring members. And what we do is we come on to the hot seat. Well, we come on to the room And then there's usually one or two people in the hot seat. And Gayle is one of the, what would you call us, panelists who are providing peer-to-peer observation? Is that what we're doing? Are we panelists?
Yeah, I think so. I think he considers it the panel of experts, but people who have either been where the person in the hot seat is, or maybe are still there and share their expertise on how they got through it or what they're doing that's working, or that kind of thing. So, but it's really most of the people that I've heard really benefit from that hot seat coaching, and it's terrifying, but I say do it.
It is fascinating to see how everybody handles their time on stage differently.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, not to, I don't want to, we have a limited window here, so let's get right into things. This is our wellness mindset segment. Formerly, I refer to it as our health and wellness segment. But I asked Gayle to come up here because she specializes in space utilization. So why don't you start off with defining what that means for you? And then, let's have you get into your tips for today on how we can all be more efficient and organized.
Great. Thank you so much again for having me, Ryan. I appreciate it. Space utilization is my version of space utilization is being able to take a look at someone's physical space, see how it functions, see how it feels, see what the purpose or the intention of the space is, being able to decide if it's practical, functional, efficient, things like that. I have found that oftentimes what we wish for our space sometimes is not practical for how we're going to use it or what we're going to do with it. So space utilization is just being able to have that bird's eye view of the way someone describes their space and what they want for it, whether it's a personal space within their home or even their office, how it's set up. It's about being able to make sure that it's set up for them to be efficient, effective, and to feel successful. People are like, how would my space make me feel successful? You'd be surprised. The more cluttered it is, the less successful we feel. So that's what I help people with is the bird's eye view of how to set up their space and utilize it in a way that really makes them feel confident and successful in any area of life.
Speak to how much of that is personal. And what I mean by that is, there's people, and it's even said, a lot of, so-called geniuses, when you look at their workspace, is just cluttered. I have, I'll use my stepdad as an example. I can't handle going into his home office because it's like a whirlwind. But when he needs something, he knows exactly where it's under and where it is. So is that not a personal preference? Do some people operate better that way?
To a certain degree, and I'm actually glad that you brought that up. One of the things that's interesting in my experience is that in my career life, anytime I've worked for other people, my office has always been immaculate. Everything had a place. I love offices because there's less emotional attachment and it's easier for things to find homes. Whereas in my personal space, I was the kind of person that had stuff stacked in piles. I knew exactly where it was. Don't touch my stuff, because if somebody moved it, I no longer knew where it was. And so I mentioned that because people can be organized at work and not at home, or vice versa. They can also be not organized anywhere. And so what's interesting about that is that the people who function that way, it's how their mind is processing what they're working on. So to them, it makes sense. They know where it is. They're usually visual people who they see something, they know where it is, as opposed to and having it where they can see it. It's out of sight, it's out of mind. So it is sort of a personal preference, but it also goes back to how much time they spend looking for stuff. If something were to happen to them, who would know where things are? So it kind of comes back to an efficiency, and it's about deciding what works for the individual versus what works for others who might be entering that person's space, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, and actually brings up something I wasn't thinking about till you started talking, which is we could have a personal workspace that affects nobody but ourselves,
Right.
such as your home office. But if you are in a group office where, especially in contemporary times, where you might have workstations in an open area, your workspace can affect the people around you and have an effect. So you are dealing with two different kind of dynamics, I think.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. And for me, it really boils down to, it's always been my philosophy and my belief that everyone has their own natural sense of order. And so it's about figuring out how they operate in their space and what makes sense to them. That's where their natural sense of order comes from. And so it's about being able to figure out what that is. That's where the space utilization or organizing strategy comes in, is that it's not a one size fits all. It's not what works for me will work for other people. There's a lot of commonalities in how someone sets up, their space, like a filing system or their pantry, like their either personal or professional space. There's consistencies with how space is set up, but where one person goes to naturally put something away or to find something, which is more important, differs for everybody. Like I said, how they think about where something goes, their natural sense of order or the thought process they have for where they put things and then recall it from, it varies depending on the person's any number of things.
So when you're working with a client and they're one of those clutter that's their mode of operandi, is clutter everywhere. Do you look at that and say, oh, this is going to be a mountain, or is it more like, oh, I'm going to really help this person out and get them cleaned up?
I love what I do, and every single space that I'm invited into, I always look at as an opportunity to awaken, just like you said in the beginning, awaken someone's mind, body, spirit, and space connection. It's about helping them to think about their space in a way that they probably never have before, and allowing them to open up to new possibilities based on what they say they want. So again, I don't go into somebody's space and say, you know what, you really should clean this up, because who am I to say that? But I might go in and say, does this work for you? And if they're like, yep, I know where everything is, don't touch a thing, then offering any sort of help or suggestion might not be in their best interest, because they may be set in their ways, but more importantly, that's how they're used to functioning. But if someone's looking to gain efficiencies, or somebody wants to know how more effective and efficient they can be by being organized, then we can talk through options and solutions to get them set up to have that space be the way that they want it to be, which is oftentimes at least tidier. There's a difference between being organized, tidy, and clean. And I always talk about that with people, because someone's space could be organized, but actually really untidy. People who work with I call them, it's a piling system. Instead of a filing system, it's a piling system. It might be really well organized. It's just not super tidy. And so it's hard to focus and function and be able to navigate all the things we have to do.
So when we go into discussion mode, I'll kind of share maybe how I operate. Love to get your input on that, but I don't
Sure.
want to take the focus away here from you. When somebody is reaching out to you,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times, what's that word? There's a saying. It's like, a lot of times it's 70% what somebody needs or means is 70%. Is only like 30% of what they're actually saying. So, because I'm getting at is when someone's reaching out to you, Gayle, I see you help with efficiency, organization. I feel like I could benefit there. What is it that you find? What is it that you find that they really need? Do they really need help organizing their desk, or is it something intrinsic? What do you usually find for people?
That's a really great question. And what's interesting that I find, the two things that I have found is that the biggest challenge that people have around being organized is that they oftentimes think or want it to be a one and done. I'm going to organize my space and it's done, and it's going to stay like that for eternity. And that's not a realistic expectation, because the more we use our space, or the areas that get a lot of use, offices, the bedrooms, the kitchens and things like that, where we rotate through clothes and food and whatever. The sad truth, spoiler alert, it's not a one and done. It takes having a routine, having a system, having a process. And so that's what they're looking for. They're like, I am so tired of things always being this way. What can I do? The first thing I do is ask them to let go of the expectation that it's always going to be perfect. Organized, because that's not realistic or possible. I'm an organizer, and I have days, I could show you pictures of days where it's like it wasn't happening today. So letting go of that. And then the other thing that we do is we create the system, we create the process, we create the habit for where things go. And we find homes for them, so that when things do get out of sorts, they get chaotic, they get disorganized, people can easily regain control of their space, because they just need to do that. I call it a blitz. I'll go through my house every morning after I drop my son off, and I'll do an organizing blitz. I'll take 10 minutes and I'll put everything away. And it's like, you wouldn't know. It looks like a tornado hit. And then all of a sudden it's
tidied up.
It's tidied up because everything goes somewhere. I just didn't have a chance to do that. And so that's what we work on, is like the thoughts, the habits, the process. I've had people say like, oh my gosh, I'm so OCD. Before I go to bed each night, I have to make sure everything's put away and like the sink is empty and the living room's picked up. And I said, there could be some tendencies there for OCD. So I don't want to, eliminate that. But I said, that's having a good system. That's having a process that every night your habit is to put stuff back. That way you wake up to a fresh, clean space. And the person's like, you know what, you're right. I do feel better when I do it. And so that's what we do, is people who have a hard time with that, we figure out what their system or process is for.
Okay. So it is about habit and process.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a client that I'm working with now, and she had actually, and I work with her virtually, which is even cooler, that I can do it without, I don't have to be in your physical space. And she worked with an organizer, and all organizers are different. I mean, even if we do the same sort of thing, how we approach it is different. And she was thrilled. So the woman came in, did an amazing job. She said, my space looked great. She said, but 2 weeks later, it looks exactly like it did before she was here, because I didn't get any system. I didn't get a process or a way to keep up with it. And that's what I really want. So that kind of goes back to the question, what are they looking for? They're looking for a way to keep up with it, maintain it, and to have it be the way that they want it ongoing.
Well, good. I look forward to continuing this part of the discussion.
Yes.
Again, Gayle Gunn, everybody, from Energy. ENER-CHI. I had her LinkedIn page up here. You need to accept my invite. I still see I'm a second connection there.
I block strangers. I'm just kidding. I have one really quickly? What I want to mention, the other thing about organizing that I want to mention really quickly is that the philosophy for me is the outside in approach is that when our space is physically cluttered, even if we think that's how we operate best, it's usually a manifestation of an internal struggle, and it doesn't have to be traumatic. It can be time management, it can be decision making, it can be overwhelm. Like there's so many different things that can play into it. Just not knowing what to do with things, and so inviting people to have the conversation if they're interested in their space being different. What that could look like for them, because we can have greater focus, greater confidence, greater multitasking. Like so many things can open up for us when our physical space is organized. Organize your space and your mind naturally follows.
Yeah. And I look forward to picking your brain a little bit during the discussion part.
Yep. You got it.
As time allows. So thank you, Gayle, for being prepared and coming up here to do that. I'm going to go ahead and bring on our panelist. Here comes Ron Sandell, and then I'm adding Rob back to the mix as well. That's right. Gayle and Ron are going to know each other from our clubhouse room. Ron was on the show last month. Actually, it was technically July, and we were talking about sales coaching. So Ron, great to have you back here. Good to see you.
Thank you.
What I'm going to do real quick before we get started is just explain a couple of things to folks. So you can see on my screen, this is the spread on today's program: employee productivity, space utilization, and organizational efficiency. I spent the first part of the show talking with Rob Marshallonis, who you can see on stage here, about employee productivity and incentives. And then Gayle and I just talked about space utilization as part of our wellness mindset segment. If you're subscribed to Auto Conversion, then you would have received an email alert about this. Hey, I'm going to ask, can you guys mute your microphones, because something's coming back. There's a loop coming back somewhere. So just go ahead and mute yourselves. It'd be great. So if you're subscribed, you get an email with this. We also share this in our Slack member network. We also share this up on our LinkedIn group. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong screen here. In fact, if you look under network, you'll see links to both our unlisted group for influencers. This is set up for people that want to get up here and be on stage and have a media play. We will work with you on a strategy, both from as being a subject matter expert, being an influencer of the programming. So make sure you request to join that group if that's of interest to you. We also have our Slack member network. Won't get into the details of this, but anybody who signs up for any of our premium programs becomes a premium Slack member, which gives you access to all of the content that we curate for our shows and for our podcast and for our affiliates. And look here under the private section, these are all the discussion groups. The way this works is if you go to the grow section, you'll see we have audio video pros, automotive marketing pros, B2B marketing pros, get paid to speak bootcamp, and our newest program, Jolt Business Vision. Some of these are free, some of them are premium. And when you sign up for them, that puts you in the system so that you can be notified when we have discussions like this coming up. And it gives you immediate access to participate in these discussions. I'll talk a little bit more about those, but I do want to let you know that if you're in the Audio Video Pros group or the B2B Marketing Pros group, every month you'll get an email with a link to the show, and you can hop up here on stage and be part of the discussion with us. With that being said, let's bring everybody on. I'm going to remove this here. And okay, so Ron, let's start with you. You got to hear, I think, the second part of my conversation with Rob, and then you saw most of the segment here with Gayle. But what's your response to space utilization? How do you operate? What works for you?
Well, look behind me. I operate in part of my living room. So yeah, I'm usually pretty well organized. I would totally agree with Gayle. Clear your space, clear your mind. I think, despite the Albert Einstein references and all that stuff, most people probably are just not that smart or efficient. So getting stuff out of the way, being able to think and focus and have everything at arm's length that you need, I just think is so important. I really do. It just eliminates a step that you have to take to get to where you want to go.
I know I operate that way. Like, I keep an amazing amount of information in my mind, and I can see it, but I still have to get it organized. In my case, digitally. Mm-hmm. I have digital tools that I use. But if I want to sit down and do any sort of work, that's the first thing I have to do, is organize what's in my mind digitally. Rob, how about yourself? How do you organize and be most efficient personally? You might be on mute. Hold on. You might need to unmute.
I have to confess, Ryan, that my preference is to be very well organized, but in reality, I often fall short. So my personality struggles with that, and probably add some unnecessary angst to my world. But in my world, relative to employee productivity, though, it makes me think of the big question now, the big transition from work from office or work from home or work from anywhere. And so I see the relevance of these workspaces it's always been important, but I think it's even more amplified now. And my input on that is, what's really the issue is your productivity. So whether you're working from an office or you're working from home or you're working from your car or your cabin or your beach house, the issue is productivity. And so I think there's a real powerful link to being organized, like you're saying, and I would agree with you, Gayle, and especially as we're working from different environments.
So let me build on that. When you do your consultations with companies on, say, work group productivity, how often does one individual's inefficiency become a factor?
Well, because our work groups are made up of individuals, we could probably say it's always a factor, but I find that it's oftentimes easier and it's greater leverage to start at least with the work group. And so how do we support work group productivity, and how do we look first at ourselves as leaders? If you believe that leadership has the greatest impact in an organization, like I do, then I oftentimes will start with the leader and say, well, what are you doing? What are your leaders doing to promote and encourage and expedite productivity? And sort of like, let's first look in the mirror and look at the log in our own eye before we get too critical of others.
I agree. When it comes to a team or an organization, leadership can kill productivity. regardless of how efficient the individual workers or the teams might be, leadership can certainly kill that. So Ron, going back to you, in your organization per se, because you work for, how large is the company you work for?
Between 50 and 100 employees.
Okay. Is employee productivity, is it a dialogue? Is it a conversation? Are there measures or systems put in place that are focused on improving productivity?
Not really. I mean, I'm in the sales side of things. I've got a team in the East region of 5 employees, um, and they're independent sales reps, so they're 1099 reps. So, getting them focused and organized is, more of a quest for me to help them. But organizationally, we don't really have anything in place to look at efficiency that I know of. I mean, we've got, all kinds of HR documents and things like that, but it's not something that I've ever heard anybody talk about in the last 5 years.
I wonder, I know the question was on productivity, but I'm kind of thinking from a individual worker's level of efficiency. Gayle, does it make sense? So Ron, he leads a sales team. I think it's about 10 or 12 people?
It's 5 right now.
Oh, it's 5. Okay. Is someone like Ron, who's like a sales director or manager of a group of salespeople, if he sees inefficiencies within the individuals, is he better off consulting someone like yourself so that he knows how to help them? Or is he better off just saying, I'm going to have you spend some time with Gayle?
That's a great question. Actually, you could go either way with that, where having a conversation about what sort of efficiencies can be gained by looking at how things are being done would certainly be helpful. But sometimes it just comes down to, if the person responsible for the team is less familiar with personality types or natural sense of order, or what actually motivates somebody or gets them to do things the way that they need to be done, then that could be a conversation where one-on-one consulting or coaching could come in handy. And it's not to say that the person in charge of the team isn't capable of it. It's just how people talk to an outside person might be different than how they talk to a direct report or somebody that they're afraid to admit, what's actually happening and why they're not doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing, if that makes sense. But with a team, it's incredibly important. I mean, I know in business, time is money, which is true, but it's actually more so that time is precious and something you can't get back. So if we're not looking for efficiencies and ways to track productivity, we could be, as business owners, leaving money on the table or losing out in other areas that we could be working on. So being organized is important with teams.
So Rob, if a company is not reaching out to you about productivity, do you have a way to assess the productivity or efficiency of teams and organizations? You really have to, get under the hood and get in there for a little while.
Yeah, I do have a process for that, Ryan. It starts with a discussion. Always starts with a discussion, typically with the owner or a senior leader. And then I'll do some, have a discussion. I'll do some research and background information. And then I have a number of tools, some surveys, some question process, and some, different assessment tools that I use. So yeah, that's typically the way the process goes.
I can tell you guys this. I've learned that I have some level of OCD. And I realized it actually after I got divorced and was living by myself. And after about a year and a half, I was like, I can't believe how obsessive I can be with certain things. And maybe it's because when I was married, maybe my wife was because I always felt she was OCD. So maybe she was getting to them before they bothered me, kind of thing. Example would be, how you get water spots on the sink? I remember she used to always wipe them off. She'd get annoyed with me because I wouldn't. And I was like, they never bother me. But then one day when I was living alone. Guess what? They started bothering me. I mean, I'm using that as an example of of OCD. And like I said earlier, I have to take what's going on in my brain and put it out. I have a few different ways to structure and organize. Before I can get to work, I have to get a certain level of organization, to the point, Gayle, where sometimes I feel like I spend more than half my time organizing. So where's the limit? That's what I'm curious about. Is there never enough organizing?
Well, in the words of one of my favorite minimalists, Josh Becker, if organizing were the answer, we would all be done by now. So organizing alone isn't necessarily the answer, but I think my question would be, what's causing you to feel like you have to keep organizing? Like what's either so out of place or what feels off about the space? That's one of the things with the space utilization that I didn't get to talk about, is like how the space makes you feel. Like, what is it that has that urge to keep going? Because I do think you can reach a point where a space is organized so that it's quick to regain, like I said before, control of it, where when it gets turned upside down, it's easy to get it back in order because everything has a home. It all goes somewhere. So if you feel like you're constantly organizing, what is it that hasn't found a home, or what is it that keeps creeping back into your space that you have to keep putting it away, is one thing. The second thing that just came to mind as I was talking is it a distraction from doing what someone is supposed to be doing? I do that. Actually, I confess, like, I don't want to work on that. So I'm going to go organize my garage, or I'm going to go organize my clothes, or they're already organized. I just don't want to do what I'm doing. So I'm going to find something to organize because it's therapeutic and it makes me feel good.
I could relate to that. I've had times where I don't feel like doing this or this or that, but I'm like, well, I could organize something. But when I think of organization, I think of it more as prioritizing tasks and projects, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I kind of have a rule that if I'm like, oh, I need to do this, the first thing I do is I put it on a list. And then I look at everything else on the list and I decide where it should go priority wise.
Mm-hmm.
Right. As opposed to just doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I'm like, oh no, I got to get that done. Like, I have to do it. And
Yeah.
I'll still put it on the list, but I'm still going to do it right now.
Yeah, I think that's a whole nother level or layer to organizing is, the organizing that we had been talking about is physical space utilization. There's a whole digital component with today's world and technology, but there's also a mental and emotional component for organizing, which is organizing our thoughts and our feelings. And the lists is one way that some people will organize their thoughts and try to prioritize. I remember something I was attending once, they said, well, how do I know what's most important? And the person looked at the audience and said, well, you're doing what's most important. Whatever is most important is what you're working on. So if you're not working on it, it's not important right now. And then being able to kind of go back and figure out when to do something, or if they even need to do something. Lists can help with that. But that's a whole nother level of organizing, is a mental organization mindset, things like that.
Versus physical things.
Yeah. Making lists, the aversion to making lists. Another suggestion that I've had for people who struggle with time management and having way too much to do is make a list of everything you feel like you have to do, and then take 50% of it off because you're not going to get to it anyway. So you'll already feel better because you're not going to do it. So don't have it on your list. It'll make you feel better. But I like to think of lists as reminders, kind reminders instead of to-dos. Like, I don't necessarily have to do it. I just don't want to forget that I'm thinking about it. So I'll write it down on a list. Making that reminder list clears my mind so I can focus on something else. I actually carry a little notebook with me that I write my stuff down so that I can easily flip back to it. But it's organizing my mind because I don't want to have to think about it all the time. So being able to write it down gets it out of your head, allows you to focus on what you need to do and then come back to it or not. So, yeah.
Ron, let me go back to you. You got the email this morning about today's discussion group because I was a little late. I usually put that out I try to get it out a few days prior, but it didn't happen this time.
No problem.
Because I struggle with organization and priority. But when you saw that and you saw the subject matter, what compelled you to say, I want to be part of that discussion? What brings you here today?
Well, productivity and organization are for the salespeople I work with are really important. Obviously, productivity is a no-brainer, right? If you're not productive in sales, then you're probably not going to be successful. And I always felt like organization was the key. And during your two discussions before I got involved at the end of this thing here was I always talk about focus and time management with clients that I work with or employees that I'm working with, because focus and time management, I think, just sort of hones everything in for salespeople, but really people in general. So if you're focused on the task or focused on the project and you assign the right amount of time, you manage that appropriately, you should be able to get it done. So I kind of look at things like from an organizational standpoint and lists and things like that, to-do lists. I kind of agree with Gayle that they're just really nice, gentle reminders. But what I've always done for 20 plus years is I'll create a to-do list of sorts. And what I'll do is I'll prioritize them. So I'll take, other than just putting them on a list, I'll put an A, a B, or a C next to them. A would be high priority, B medium, and C would be like, yeah, if I have nothing better to do, I'll get to that. Because what I've learned over time is if you just create a generic list, you'll go through that list and you'll pick out the easiest tasks first, the ones you know you can get done, and you'll get them done. And then you'll have all these sort of simple, easy, potentially not valuable tasks completed successfully, but you really won't kind of change the trajectory of whatever you're trying to accomplish. So urgency, importance, kind of funnels into that ABC mentality. And I've always found that really works well. So I really enjoyed listening to Rob talk about employee productivity and Gayle with all of her organizational expertise and knowledge. So I when I saw it, I just jumped right in. I mean, I did have a little bit of a gap in my schedule. But definitely the topics really spoke to me from a sales and performance type of coaching person.
Yeah, I don't see how they couldn't, because it's a battle I think we're all up against, is the distractions. I got to look up, there's a term for this. Maybe one of you knows it, but it's the whole idea that as we add measures to be safer or to improve, then we create other problems. So a good example was seatbelts.
Mm-hmm.
Seatbelts were invented because people were dying in low speed crashes. Well, what can we do about that? Well, let's make seatbelts. Let's make cars safer. Well, now, 80 years later, we drive 90 miles to 100 miles an hour and weave in and out of traffic and we tailgate people. So there's a term for it. I was hoping one of you might know. There's a term for that, where we improve things, but then we kind of negate that. And I find that we're all faced with that in business with technology. Let's go pre-telephone. Imagine doing business before the telephone. Everything would have been done in person or with writing letters. That was it. Advertising was a relatively kind of I don't know, it wasn't as common, right? You might get a local paper with an ad in it, but no, it was about who you know. It's about networking, who you know, and then you see them in person or others. Well, then you get the telephone. So what happens? Now you can reach out to more people. Now you've got more unqualified opportunities, but within there you can get more qualified opportunities. Then we got email. It's like we keep adding more chaos, more pressure, more noise, to the point where now, yes, we might have technology to do more and be more efficient, but effectively, I don't think we are as a species as a whole. I think we're just more buried in chaos at this point.
Well, I think what happens is it overcompensates, and then you have too many options. So you have these digital to-do lists, right, and all of these other things. And I use my iPhone, and I basically just create a note, and I create a note for this job or this work thing that I'm doing, and this one and that one. And then I just have these running tasks in A, B, or C category. And I put a little I use the circle, and then I can check it off when I get it. Well, actually I check it off when I'm working on it, and then I delete it when I'm done. So that's as digital as I've gone, because all of these other tools, these apps, they just become so complex. They take longer to figure out how to, in my opinion, make them work for you than pen and paper or a note, which is my digital version of pen and paper. I think we've gotten way too complicated with a lot of things from an organizational standpoint, and just keeping it more simple, logical seems to work better, I think, for more people. I don't know. Gayle probably knows much more about that than I do.
Brian, as I'm hearing this, I really like a lot of the things that Gayle has said, and the overlay of LSP. I mean, in many ways, talking about your mental organization, LSP is a simple way for me to organize my priorities, leadership, strategy, process. And so as I'm thinking about this, it's my own kind of simple organization tactic or strategy, really. It's a strategy. And then down within that, my favorite strategy for driving productivity is incentives. And so out of that come a whole bunch of processes, but you just really have me thinking, Gayle. I tend to think of organization and how my file drawer looks or my phone is set up, but the whole mental organization is huge.
That's a big part of it. And so just like helping, or not helping, but like working with people to see their space in a way that they may not thought of. It's the same thing with thinking of organizing in a way that they may not have thought of, is that it's not just about the physical aspect. It's about, it actually boils down to three things. If you want to keep it super simple, it boils down to having a system, having a process, and having good habits in place. Anything, whether it's personal or professional, is those three things. Do you have a system? Do you have a process? And do you have habits in place to maintain it or manage it? And like I just said, and that can be any room in your home. It can be any area of your office. It can be any way that you do the thing that you do with your clients or with your teams or with your relationships, anything. It really boils down to those three things.
Yeah. And as I'm sitting here talking and listening, I'm realizing, because my big challenge is the prioritization, that mental, you even threw feelings in there, of organization. But as I said earlier, I spend an incredible amount of time physically organizing, because to me, that's the first step. I'm like, to your point, Gayle, I need physical tidiness before I can get into mental tidiness. I need that first.
Yeah. And I think, so using the example that, using what you had just said about needing to write things down or have your space physically organized, but then finding that you're spending more than half of your time doing those things, you could actually apply the three things that I just mentioned: the process, the system, the process, and the habits. Is, do you have all three of those in place for organizing yourself so that you can do what it was that you wanted to do? And so what that translates to is, you do have a system. You like to write down what you do in order of priority, or write it down and then try to prioritize it. But then what's the process? Like, once you write it down, then what? Do you then go through it in order and do it the way you wrote it down? Do you go off and do something else because you feel better that you have it done, but now you're going to go do something else, like keep organizing? Like, what's next? Once you have your system, what's your process? And then the habits in place, where it's like, okay, my system and my process is, I'm going to write down every morning. Some people do this. Every morning, I'm going to write down what I want to do today. And then I'm going to go off and I'm going to do it. And the way that I check in with myself is, I don't even have to think about doing it. It's just the way that I do what I do. So it's a habit. Habits are things that we do without having to think about doing them. So anything that we're looking to organize, ask yourself those three questions: what's my system, what's my process, and what's my habit for doing it? And, like I said, we pick the low-hanging fruit. We do the things that distract us from doing what we want to do because the habit's not in place to keep going. But it applies to any, like I said, any and all areas of things that we're looking to organize.
Well, maybe we'll do a follow-up segment in a few months and have people share how they organize, both, physical and digital. Because we could always, use some tips to be more efficient. We're out of time, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it down. But let me bring everybody's names back up so people can see them. We have Gayle Gunn here, on our organizing strategist. Gayle, if someone wants to reach you, where's the best place for them to go? Is it LinkedIn, or you have a website for them to go to?
You can use LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook, and my website is hopefully super easy or super simple. It's my first and last name, GayleGunn.com. Gayle is spelled with a Y, Gayle. Gunn is spelled with 2 N's, GUNN.com. And that takes you right to all my information.
Great. And I had Rob's site up, lsp123.com, leadership strategy process. And then if you want to look at his book, you can go to incentshare.com. So Rob, thanks for making the time today and being here. Enjoyed having the conversation with you. And then Ron, thanks for hopping in. Great to see you up here as well. Ron Sandell, everybody, sales performance coach. He and I have been working together. And like I said, Gayle and Ron know each other from our weekly clubhouse on Thursday. It's the hot seat. If you're interested in getting in the hot seat or just getting to know some great people, other business leaders and owners, be sure to look at that as well. Guys, I'm going to go ahead and let you exit the stage. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here, folks. So I'm going to bring my screen back up. So like I said, we're doing this once a month. It's a live show. If you're interested in being on the show, definitely reach out to me. If you're interested in just being in the know about when our shows are coming up, what you want to do is head over to autoconversion.net. Got a couple options here. You can subscribe, go to Get Started and subscribe. You'll basically get emails from us. You can specify the frequency. Maybe you want, every email, every blog post we do, maybe you want weekly, maybe you just want monthly. Other option is go to the Grow menu. What you'll see there is our mastermind programs. You'll see B2B Marketing Pros. I think I have the sign up page there. You can sign up and then you'll be notified as we prepare different sessions and activities. We use Clubhouse, we use Slack, and then we do these live panel discussions. I do have an announcement coming out. A new addition to the Grow group is the Jolt Business Vision Program. This is a monthly, think of it like a mastermind roundtable type of thing, if you will, that you can sign up for. It's a brand new program. It's for aspiring or business leaders and owners in general. What we do is we're focused on really kind of a two-prong approach, aligning your business vision with your personal vision. And that doesn't mean you have to own a business. It's your career. Think of your career as the business of yourself. It's the means to an end for your livelihood. And that needs to align with your personal vision, what it is that you're here for, what's your purpose, and what are you trying to accomplish as a person here on the planet. So you want to align that. The other prong in there is your media and public relations strategy. If having content, if getting in podcasts, getting in videos, getting into blogging, if these are things that you're doing, that you're trying to get done, or maybe you're looking to get it done more efficiently, which you just talked about efficiently, this could be a very good program for you. Sign up now. It's a month-to-month program priced at $195 a month. You do get a pro license with auto conversion to strategize with us and be up here in our programming. It's, like I said, it's a month-to-month program. So definitely check that out. And like I said earlier, head over to the network section, get into our influencers group if you want to influence our programming here by coming on stage and being part of these discussions like Gayle and Ron and Rob were today. And anything you sign up for, you'll get an invite to our Slack member network where you have access to all of the information that we curate and process from day to day, from week to week, and including our shows. I am Ryan Girardi. Thanks again for tuning in to today's program. We're going to go ahead and sign off. We'll be back later this month because we skipped a week. So we'll have our follow-up. We'll have our next live show later this month. I want to say that might be on the 28th. So definitely go to autoconversion.net and get subscribed. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, great rest of your day, and great rest of the week. Thank you.